In this video, we're going to be covering how to factor trinomials or quadratics when the a does not equal 1 using the guess and check method. So when a doesn't equal 1, that means you have an actual number in front of the x squared, okay? And then our answers are going to look like this, where we have ax plus and then a number and then x plus another number there. Sometimes they're the same, most time they're different. Quick review, what is factoring? Factoring is when you are rewriting an expression as factors, as things being multiplied. So check it out here, right? So here we have this plus this plus this. We have three things being added, okay? Now, the factored form is where you have this binomial times this binomial here. So we changed it from things being added to things being multiplied, or we rewrote it as factors. Now, there are several methods for factoring quadratics when the a does not equal 1. When we say a doesn't equal 1, we're basically saying there's a number in front of the x squared, okay? So if you have a number in front of the x squared, always check, first step, is there a greatest common factor? If there is, undistribute, okay? Now, if that's already been done or there is no greatest common factor, guess and check will work, box method will work, bottoms up method, Australian method, grouping method. So these are several methods that you can use for factoring quadratics. So my favorites, if a is prime, do guess and check. If not, do bottoms up. And then if you need it, the grouping one works for if it's a complicated quadratic or trinomial that you're trying to factor, okay? But the yellow ones, those are my go-to ones there, okay? And then when you get really good at quadratic functions, you can kind of cheat a little bit by graphing or using quadratic formula if you got a graphing calculator or a scientific calculator, okay? So now we're going to review foiling or multiplying binomials, because factoring is foiling but backwards. So sometimes I'll actually refer to it as unfoiling, okay? So for FOIL or multiplying binomials, we got to multiply the 3x to both of these and multiply the -4 to both of these here. So here we go. For the firsts, 3x times x, 3x squared, 3x times 2, 6x, -4 times x for the inners, -4x, and -4 times 2 makes a -8. Now, we can still add like terms, right? So we still have the 3x squared there. These two, the outers and the inners, we can add those up to make 2x, and then we have the lasts, just a -8 there. Now, the reason why knowing this is important is because, again, when we are factoring, we're doing this process, but in reverse, okay? So our questions are going to look like this, and our answers will look like this. So right here, quick example, right? 5x squared plus 11x plus 2. Now notice this 5x squared here. We're going to break that up into 5x and x because we're going backwards. So remember this 3x squared, that came from the 3x times the x. It came from the firsts. And then this -8 or -8 came from the lasts, -4 times 2. So that means the 5x and the x make 5x squared. And then these two blanks here, they're going to multiply to 2. So in this case, we only have two options. We can do 2 times 1, or we can do 1 times 2. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to guess and check. We're already going to know that the firsts make 5x squared and the lasts, this one or this one, multiply to a 2. So now we're just going to check the inners and the outers. Which one of those, when I do the inners and outers, are going to add up and give us 11. Before we get into actually factoring some quadratics in this video here, let's back up and just look at the easiest method or procedure for factoring different types or styles of quadratics. So for number 1, if you notice, there's just a 1x squared here. It's a 1. There's no number in front of the x squared. So there's a 1 of them. So we basically call that an a equals 1. So when we go to factor that, we're just going to go x plus and x plus in our parentheses. And then this number here, these two numbers here, the lasts, they are going to multiply to 6 and they're going to add to a 5. So figure out those numbers, put those in there, boom, and done. For number 2, notice that there is a number in front of the x squared. So this means that the a does not equal 1. It equals, in this case, 2. Now also notice that a 2 divides into the 10 and the 12. So 2 divides all three of these. They have a common factor. So basically what you're going to do is undistribute the 2 from all three terms. So divide by 2, divide by 2, divide by 2. So now we have it looks like this. And then the 2 stays. And now what we're going to do is this x squared plus 5x plus 6, we're going to factor same as what we did right up here. And for the bottom quadratic, notice that there's also a 2 in front of the x squared. So a does not equal 1. However, this 2 does not divide the other two terms. So it does not have a greatest common factor. So you're doing a doesn't equal 1. And there's several different ways of doing it. This video is going to be on guess and check. And so our answer is going to look like this. And then we're going to be guessing pairs of numbers that multiply to 15. And then when you do the outers and the inners, those add to 11. You can also use like a bottoms up method or a grouping method if you want to as well. So now we're going to factor this quadratic using the guess and check method. So our answer is going to look like this, x plus in parentheses. Now the firsts have to multiply to a 7x squared. So that there's only one option. It's a 7 and a 1, or a 1 and a 7. But normally for the way I do it, I put the number first. So I have a 7x plus a number and then x plus another number. Normally they're different numbers. Sometimes they're the same. Okay. So now our lasts here and here have to multiply to a 6. So there's 4 options. We can go 1 and 6. We can go 2 times 3. And then we can also reverse those numbers as well. So 6 and 1 and then 3 and 2. And it order on these ones here where you have a number in front of your x, order does matter. Okay. So a coefficient on the x, order matters. Okay. So now we just guess. Okay. Well, let's guess. Maybe it's a 1 and a 6. So we put 1 and a 6 there for our blanks. And now we check, right? We re-multiply these back out to see if 1 and 6 are those two numbers. Now, we already know the firsts are good and the last is good, right? 7x times x makes 7x squared. 1 times 6 makes 6. We already know that part. So really all we're doing is we're checking the inners and the outers to make sure that those add up to a 17. Okay, so here we go. The outers first, 7x times 6, that's 42. And then 1 times x, that's a 1x. And then we're checking, is that going to make a 17x? In this case, no. 42 and 1 make 43. So we're not even really that close. So we know it's not a 1 and a 6. So now we check another one. Okay, let's try the 2 and the 3. Okay, so there we go. We got a 2 and a 3 in there. Again, we already know that the first and last are good, so we're only checking the inners and the outers. So 7x times 3, 21x. 2 times x, 2x. 21 plus 2, that makes 24. We're hoping for a 17. So it's not 2 and 3, but we're closer. So now we'll try 3 and 2. Okay, so 3 there, 2 there. Again, first and last are taken care of, right? All these numbers already multiply to a 6, and the 7x and the x already multiply to an x squared. We don't have to check the firsts and the last, just the inners and outers. So here we go. 7x times 2 makes 14x. 3 times x makes 3x. 14x plus 3x does indeed make 17x, and we're done. So let's have you go ahead and pause the video, try this one out on your own, then come on back and see how you did. So here we go with factoring 3x squared plus 16x plus 20. Our answer is going to look like this. We got to have some blanks here. For the firsts, those are going to multiply to 3x. It's prime, so we really only got one choice, 3 and 1. So we put a 3x there and then a 1x there. And then for our last, our blanks here for guess and check, we're guessing pairs of numbers that multiply to 20 to our last, okay? So that's going to be 1 and 20. This list is going to be a little long, right? We're going to have a 2 and a 10. We're going to have a 4 and a 5. And that's it for that one. But remember, we need to switch them around because order does matter. So we can do 20 and 1, 10 and 2, and then 5 and 4. And there's our list. You can either write it down like what we have here, or you can kind of just go through in your head and try and figure out which one works, okay? So we're going to start with the 4 and the 5, right? So there, we have a 4 and a 5. Now, we already know 3x times x makes 3x squared. All of these numbers here, 4 times 5, are all going to make 20. We don't even have to check the firsts and the lasts. We only need to check the inners and outers to make sure that they add up to make a 16. So here we go. 3x times 5, 15x, 4x, or 4 times x makes 4x. So 15x plus 4x, does that make 16x? It's 19, so we're close, but nope, it doesn't work. So 4 and 5 is not the answer. Let's try another one. Let's try 5 and 4. Here we go. 5 and 4. So we already know firsts are good and lasts are good, so we're just checking inners and outers. 3x times 4 is 12x. 5 times x is 5x. 12x and 5x, does that make 16x? we're close. 17, but no. Okay, so 5 and 4, not the answer. Okay, so next up, let's try another one. Let's try 10 and 2. Okay, so there's 10 and 2 there. So we already know first and last are good. So we're checking outers and inners. So 3x times 2, 6x, 10 times x, 10x, 10x plus 6x does indeed make 16x. So there's our answer there. Here we have another example. We're going to factor 2x squared minus 11x plus 12. Okay, so here's what our answer is going to look like. Now notice we have minuses here instead of pluses because these two numbers multiply to a positive and they add to a negative, right? Negative times negative makes positive and negative plus negative makes a negative. So we know that these are going to be minuses, okay? So now for our firsts, they have to multiply to make a 2x squared. So the only option there is 2 and 1. So there's a 2x and a 1x there. And then for our lasts, have to multiply to a positive 12. They're both going to be negative because they're going to add to a negative 11. So we got negative 1 and negative 12, negative 2, negative 6, negative 3, negative 4, and there's the first part of the list. Now we got to switch it around because order does matter when we have numbers in front of our x's for our factors here. So we have the reverse of those, negative 12 and 1, negative 6 and negative 2, negative 4, negative 3, and that was 12 and negative 1 there. Okay, so here we go. Now we just start guessing, okay? So we'll start out with the negative 2 and the negative 6. And quick note with these, normally it's not these top numbers with the ones. So don't start with those necessarily unless you have a good reason to, unless you get really good at this and then start with whichever pairs of numbers you think is going to work. But normally it's not the top row there, okay? So negative 2 and negative 6. So here we go. So we got a 2x minus 2 and an x minus 6, and now we're guessing. So we already know 2x times x makes 2x squared, so we don't have to check the firsts, the lasts, and 2 times 6 makes 12. So we already, and all of these are going to make positive 12, so we don't have to check the lasts either. We're just checking the inners and the outers, okay? So here we go. 2x times negative 6 is a negative 12x. Negative 2 times x makes a negative 2x. And now we're asking ourselves, negative 12 plus a negative 2x, does that make negative 11x? It's negative 14, so no, not negative 11x. So we know it's not negative 2, negative 6. Let's try another pair. Let's try negative 3 and negative 4. Here we go. So we already know first and last are good. We're just checking inners and outers. So we got 2x times negative 4. That's a negative 8. And then negative 3 times x makes negative 3x. Negative 8x and negative 3x does indeed make negative 11x. So boom, there's our answer. So here we go with factoring using guess and check, 2x squared minus 10x minus 12. So we're going to start out with kind of our blanks there, and we're checking for the first. Now, the two numbers that go here, they're going to have to multiply to a 2x squared. There's only one option there. It's a 2x and a 1x there. Now we're going to start looking at our lasts for our guesses, right? So our total list of guesses, they're going to have to multiply to a negative 12. So we know one is positive, the other one is negative, but we can start with 1 times negative 12. We can do 2 times negative 6. We can do 3 times negative 4. And that's the first part of our list, okay? So we can also switch the negatives around. Instead of the negative being on the 12, now it can be on the 1. Instead of the negative on the 6, now it's on the 2. Same thing with the 3 and the 4. Now, again, with these ones here, since we have coefficients on our firsts that are different, we also need to change the order of the numbers. So instead of a 1, negative 12, a negative 12, 1. Instead of a 2, negative 6, negative 6, 2. Same thing with the 3 and the 4 or the 4 and the 3. And then we can also do the same with this part of the list here, okay? So there is all the possibilities for our lasts. Okay, so now we start making guesses, right? So our first guess could be negative 4, 3. So it'd be 2x minus 4, x plus 3. And now we refoil to do our check portion. But here's the thing with guess and check, right? We already know the firsts are always going to multiply to make 2x squared. The lasts, any of these that we check are always going to multiply to a negative 12. So we're just checking the outers and the inners to see if they add up to make negative 10x. So here we go. 2x times 3, 6x, negative 4 times x, negative 4x. Do they add to make negative 10x? Nope, that's a 2x. 2x. So we know negative 4, 3, not it. Okay, let's try another one. Let's try negative 6, 2. Here we go. So 2x minus 6, x plus 2. We already know the firsts are good and the last are good. We're just checking outers and inners. 2x times 2, 4x, negative 6 times x, negative 6x. That's going to make a negative 2. We were hoping for negative 10 instead. So it's not negative 6 and 2. Let's try another one. How about negative 12, 1. Okay, let's try that one. Here we go. 2x minus 12, x plus 1. We're already good for the first and the last, just checking the outers and the inners. 2x times 1, that's going to be 2x. Negative 12 times x makes 12x. Now, when we add these two together, they do indeed make negative 10x. So there's our answer there. So let's have you go ahead and try this one out on your own. Pause the video, then come on back and see how you did. So here we go with factoring 5x squared minus 2x minus 24 using the guess and check method. So we know that the firsts have to multiply to a 5x squared, so the coefficient, the numbers in front have to multiply to a 5. There's only one option there because 5 is prime. It's a 5 and a 1. So we have a 5x and a 1x. We already know those multiply to make 5x squared. Now for these numbers here behind the x's, those are going to multiply to a negative 24. So there's a lot of options for that there, right? We can go 1 and negative 24, 2, negative 12, 3, negative 8, and then we can do 4 and negative 6. So we can also switch things around with our positives and negatives, right? So we can switch the negative from the 24 onto the 1. We can switch the negative from the 12 onto the 2, the 8 and the 3, right? And then instead of 4 and negative 6, it's a negative 4, positive 6, okay? And then with these, because we have coefficients in our answer that are different, we can also, or we need to, at least switch the order of the numbers. So instead of negative 1, 24, 24, negative 1. Instead of negative 2, 12, 12, negative 2, right? So on and so forth. And then we can also do the same thing with this column here. Okay, so negative 24 and 1, negative 12 and 2, negative 8 and 3, negative 6 and 4. So there's all the possibilities. Now, this is a bunch, not lying to you. So if you want to, though, you can write these in your notes. So the next time you have a quadratic that you need to factor that has a negative 24, you already have the list made. It'll help you go a little bit faster. Some people, they just don't even write their list down. They just do it in their head and they just kind of try and keep track, okay, as they're doing guess and check. So now that we have all of our lists, we can start guessing, right? So let's start out by guessing 6 and negative 4. So boom, there's 6 and negative 4 in there. Now we already know the first 5x times x is always going to make x squared. And we know that any of these numbers that we guess here, in this case 6 and negative 4, it's always going to multiply to a negative 24. So we're good there. So now for our checks, we're only checking the outers and the inners. So here we go. 5x times negative 4, negative 20x, 6 times x, 6x. Now we're going to add these up and we're hoping that we get a negative 2. In this case, it's a negative 14, so not negative 2. So we know 6 and negative 4, not part of the answer. So let's try another one. Let's try 8 and negative 3. Here we go. Checking the outers and the inners. We already know the first and last are good. 5x times negative 3, negative 15x. 8 times x, 8x. Add those up and you get a negative 7x. We were hoping for negative 2x. Doesn't equal. So we know that 8 and 3, not part of the answer. Let's try another one. Let's try 12 and negative 2. Here we go. 12 and negative 2. First and last are good. Let's try outers and inners. 5x times negative 2, negative 10x. 12 times x, 12x. When we add these up, we don't get a negative 2. Instead, we do get a positive 2. Oh, it's the opposite of what we wanted. So guess what our answer is going to be? The opposites. Instead of a positive negative 12 and 2, it's going to be a negative 12 and a positive 2. So we're switching the signs there. Now check it out. Here we go. 5x times 2 makes 10x. Negative 12 times x makes negative 12x. And guess what we get? We get negative 2. So there's our answer there. So quick little wrap up here. When we're factoring using guess and check, that is when a equals 1 and you don't have a common divisor or common factor on any of those terms. If you do have that greatest common factor, undistribute that and then continue factoring. If there's no common factor, then this video went over the guess and check method. Okay, so guess and check, we set up our firsts first, right? So multiplies to 2x squared, that's going to be a 2x and an x. And then these numbers that go here, the lasts, those are going to multiply to a negative 6. So if you don't write out the list, at least have one in your head, or vice versa. If you don't have one in your head, then write it out, right? To make sure you get them all, right? Multiplies to negative 6, 1 and negative 6, 2 and negative 3. And then we can switch things around on these ones because it multiplies to a negative. So we can do -1 and a +6. We can do a -2 and a +3. And then we can switch things up, right? -6 and +1, -3 and a 2. We can do a 6 and a -1 and a 3 and a -2, switching these ones around here, okay? And then we're guessing these, right? So we're going to pick pairs of these numbers and put them in for the lasts. Now we already know that 2x times x is going to make 2x squared, so we don't have to check that. And then we also know that any of these numbers that we check, when I put them here, they're going to multiply to make a -6. So we don't have to check that. So we're only checking the outers and the inners to make sure that they add to the middle term or the b term. In this case here, that would be a -1. Okay, my recommendation again, anytime you make a list of all of these factors, write them down in your notebook kind of neatly, so that way next time you go through and have another -6 that you're going to be working on, you don't have to rewrite a list. So kind of keep a page of lists while you're doing the guess and check factoring. Hey, if you liked the video, please leave a like on it. If you didn't like the video, hit the dislike button twice just to make sure.